It's the Jersey Blitz, NJ.com's high school football podcast. Hello, Jersey football fans. I'm Dan Long, and on today's episode, I'll be joined by NJ.com football writers Patti, Donovan Hugel, Kevin Minnick, and Joe Zedalis, as we'll talk a bit about some of the big headlines involving teams in the Super Football Conference from Week 3. We'll have a roundup of the Shore Conference, as well as touching on 3 big topics of discussion from South Jersey. We'll also have our roundtable discussion on our NJ.com Top 20, while taking a look at some of the games our writers are most looking forward to this weekend. And of course, we'll end it all with our in-depth preview of Bergen Catholic versus Don Bosco Prep in a matchup of 1 versus 2 in the Garden State. So starting off this episode, I'm joined by Patti. And Ryan, you were treated to a fantastic Top 20 showdown in Bergen County last Friday night, a game that came down to the last play between Ramapo and Old Tappan.
Yeah, Dan, I didn't think I would cover a game better than Bergen Catholic East St. Louis, that the game we saw in Week 0. And this game came pretty darn close to it. It ended with a great open field tackle by Leo Eder on Casey Grusser at the 2-yard line. But I think you have to give credit where credit's due to what happened before that. 4 touchdowns from All-State tight end Shane Small. He had 9 catches for 127 yards in total, and he was hurt for the regular season last year, but you saw what he did in the playoffs last year, and he's back at it. He's doing his thing both ways. He also had a number of tackles. Zach Maselli, the junior quarterback, he did some ad-libbing, a lot of running around. I called him Zach Manzelli after Johnny Manziel, and that's what he looked like the other night. I mean, he's absolutely sensational, and he had the quietest 74 rushing yards that I've ever seen. And you just really got to look at how explosive this Old Tappan offense is. And, by their standards, they didn't really have a flashy first half. It wasn't a great first half really at all. Then they go out in the second half and score 21 points. And it came with a JV offensive line. I mean, they had all 5 starters hurt, according to Brian Dunn. And on the flip side, Ramapo, I came away pretty impressed too. Grusser has some stuff that he probably wants back, a couple moments, he wants back in that game, but a 56-yard rushing touchdown, looks faster, stronger, made a lot of the tough throws. And then the backfield duo, you have Liam Hayward, Gino George, 2 seniors running really hard, and they ran for a lot of yards as a team. And ultimately just a great game between 2 top 20 teams. And I said it before the game on Instagram and TikTok with the weekly videos I do, and I'll say it again. These 2 teams could very much be on the field at Rutgers or MetLife at the end of the year playing for a state title.
I totally agree with that. I was blown away at how good Ramapo was right away in that first week of the season against Irvington. And it's such a nice rivalry that dates back so many different decades, but it's been one-sided of late, and now it's back-to-back years wins for Old Tappan that kind of buoys them as they're trying to make their march towards maybe the title of best public school in Bergen County.
Yeah, Old Tappan is they're just on a tear of another level right now. If they run the table, and obviously it's going to be very tough for them to do with that schedule they play. They still have to play Northern Highlands, and obviously, when you get to the playoffs, all bets are off. The bracket they're going to play in is loaded, and they met up with Mainland last year in the state final. We'll see, who they match up with this year if they do make it there. But just as time goes on, the games are only going to get harder. But if they do run the table, I believe the last game of the year would be Coach Dunn's 200th win, or maybe the game before that. But that'd be one heck of a milestone and way to get it done there. But, they're just on another level right now. You see where they're ranked in our top 20, and they're just finding new ways to win. They're the public school Bergen Catholic right now, it seems, up north. And you just have to tip your cap to Coach Dunn and the staff. 5 junior offensive linemen. That's something that probably impressed me most, even more than, Eder's tackles, that you could patch it together on the offensive line like that and find a way to win. They're just doing an amazing job.
And the St. Peter's Prep 2025 Redemption Tour continues to march on. They finally knock off Delbarton, a team that had their number over the last couple of seasons, and they're doing so in a dominant fashion. The St. Peter's Prep team, Ryan, you were talking all about it. They are for real right now in terms of being able to produce on offense and shutting teams down on defense, something they had not been able to do over the last couple of seasons.
Yeah, this was a big hurdle for the Marauders. And, like you mentioned, they lose their last 3 to Delbarton before this one, and they got outscored pretty drastically in those games. But this was, another moment where they could show how good they are, and they did. 42-7 win, running clock, and they scored in a variety of ways. A couple of big plays to Temple commit Hunter Watson from Tyler Bell. I mean that combo is deadly. They have 7 touchdowns this year together, and Bell also had a rushing touchdown. So did Tyler Barksdale and Abdul Turay. You know, 2 really, really talented backs I've mentioned before on the podcast. And then how about Taylor Clark again? Last week it was a kick return against Shabazz, and this week it's a pick six. You know, we're kind of seeing like Will Hill type stuff from him, where like when the ball's in his hands in any phase of the game, you know, he's a threat to score. It's kind of like that Ed Reed ability for, you know, all the NFL fans out there. But another great performance by the rest of the defense too. I mean, this is a really good team in all 3 phases, and you know they're going to get a chance to move up even higher in our rankings this week. They're up to 5 now, but they play St. Joe's, and we'll talk about that game in a little bit, and it's going to be a really fun game.
Nice transition there as we bring in Donovan Hugel. Donovan, St. Joe's, they had to survive a stiff test from Paramus Catholic over the last weekend, and in doing so, they also have some injury concerns coming out of that win on the road. What is life looking like right now for SJR?
I mean, in if you're going to ask Augie Hoffman, it looks good because he said that Lamar Best and Nate Bailey are going to be healthy for next week's game against St. Peter's, or this week's coming game against St. Peter's. But I mean, especially Nate Bailey, like I'll have to believe it when I see it for when he hits the field. The word on the street is that he suffered a high ankle sprain first play of the game, didn't play the rest of the game. You know, high ankle sprains are usually several weeks of recovery to come back from. That's a big loss for them if he does miss a couple of weeks, and it definitely hurts their chances of beating Peters. I mean, if that guy was 3'4", 5 inches taller, he'd be a Power 4 recruit. But because he's smaller, he's going to Harvard. But he's an incredibly powerful wide receiver. He's so fast, so strong, so good in small areas, so good on the deep ball. And Lamar Best, they're suffered a hamstring injury after week 1, was able to recover in time for week 2. He took a massive hit out in the flat midway through the third quarter against Paramus Catholic. Right shoulder, throwing shoulder came up limp. You know, Augie Hoffman says that they're going to be healthy. Hopefully for all of us, they'll be healthy because it's really fun to see both of those two play. But, you know, the question begs to be asked of will they actually be missing time this season?
And Donovan, whenever you're talking about St. Joe's, you're talking about those 2 players in particular. And with Bailey running kind of everything for the team as a wide receiver, as a running back, rarely leaves the field, him being hampered any which way, like you said, with a high ankle sprain, that changes the complexion of this game where, if healthy coming into it, St. Joe's is your favorite against St. Peter's Prep. If you're the Marauders, are you feeling you might be catching St. Joe's at the perfect time?
I mean, yeah, like straight up. Like, yeah, I mean, I feel like with those 2 hurt, I mean, you know, no one is ever hoping for somebody to be hurt. But the fact of the matter is that, like, those 2, there's an argument that those 2 are the 2 best players on the field whenever they step onto the field. And with those 2 hurt, it completely changes the complexion, completely changes the game plan. Like you said, Nate Bailey he's been a runner in the red zone. He's been catching deep passes all season. So with him out, you know, Peters, their game plan probably becomes a little bit easier, I would guess. Joe's would probably look to run the ball a little bit more, especially with, you know, Richard Rigaglioso. He had a good game last week against PC. But yeah, I mean, it definitely changes the complexion. I'd bet that Peters, you know, their guess is probably as good as mine for if Nate Bailey and Lamar Best do suit up. But yeah, I mean, if they're not out there, I'm sure that it's going to be a little bit easier for St. Peter's to wreak some havoc on defense.
And a team that I'm going to see in person come Saturday for our broadcast is Mount Olive. And they have a little more to prove to show if they have the goods this year. But you're interested in them. How are they going to respond after having a nice start to the year?
You know, they had 2 really easy wins to start the year, I'll be completely honest. They beat up on Roxbury 35-7, then they beat up on Randolph 43-7. Chatham comes in for week 3 against them. I was at that game last Friday night. You know, Mount Olive, they won the section 2 years ago in North Group 4. And then they, you know, in there were, you know, they won 6-4 last year, but, you know, for them, that's disappointing. There's definitely out to prove something this year. And the talent is there for them this year. They do have Braden Longo, Raynell Derrick, Malcolm Gilliard. Gilliard specifically came up with a couple big plays after Longo and Derrick got hurt in the third and fourth quarter. But you know, the talent is there with those 3 at running back. Tommy Canning is a very steady wide receiver. Frank Gallows continued progression at quarterback. James Shemenko, Jared Martini, Liam Shelton, Justin Bullock plugging holes on the D line. I could go on and on. But with that being said, North Group 4 is crowded. Ryan talked about it earlier. There's Northern Highlands, Peeper, Woodbridge, Ramapo, Wayne Valley, Knowles. So much more in that section that Mount Olive probably needs to be a little bit more consistent to be in the contender category with those teams.
So that's a look at some of the headlines up north. And now we set our sights on the Shore Conference and bring in Joe Zedalis. And Joe, I think one of the big headlines, obviously, for me is looking at the continued struggles of Toms River North. This was the team that everyone looked at for so many different seasons coming into this year, 40-2 in their last 42 games. But they're not only losing, they just can't score. And that's where you could kind of see the pecking order is wide open down in the Shore.
Well, I think the big thing, Dan, and I've touched on it in a couple of the segments here, is that they haven't been able to protect the passer. They haven't been able to run the ball consistently. So, they'll bring in Garrison to run the Wildcat, but opponents, and you saw this in the season opener against Toms River North, they know he can't throw the ball, so they walk the safeties up into the box, and it makes running even more difficult. I mean, they lost in excruciating fashion last week, Dan. Literally the last play of the game, Brick Memorial quarterback Jason LaGuara, threw his fourth touchdown pass to Nizier Matthews, who made a catch over two Toms River North defenders at the back of the end zone, with only a handful of ticks left. So, yeah, Toms River North is still something of a question mark. We keep thinking, okay, they're going to get it together. They're going to get it together. They're going to get it together. I don't know if they can beat Southern this week. Southern doesn't give up many points. They don't give up yards on the ground. And, Toms River North, the one thing they do not seem to have, Dan, is over the last 3 years, how many times did we see them fall behind a little bit and then all those enormous big play capabilities come into play? They just don't have it, or at least they have not shown it yet.
What else is standing out to you right now in the Shore Conference after last weekend?
Oh, Southern Regional being 4-0. I wrote earlier on Sunday in our storyline section that, this is great that Southern is off to a 4-0 start. They scored 35 first half points last week against Brick, who was also unbeaten at the time. The fast starts are just incredible. Turnovers early in games against Central. They had 2 interceptions that led to early scores against Brick. They recovered a fumble and intercepted a pass. And you're able to put together these massive time-consuming drives against Central Regional 2 weeks ago. They had a 20-play drive. Last week they had a 15-play drive, and they just wear you out. Southern this week plays Toms River North. What's going to happen there? I don't know. Let's remember right now, Toms River North won't even qualify for the playoffs.
I was just about to ask, is there a scenario that Toms River North, who have been the state champions in Group 5, don't even make it into a playoff scenario?
I don't think so, Dan, because, upcoming is a game against their winless intra-township rival, Toms River South. So I would like to think they don't lose that game, but, certainly if they do, it's going to be a tough road to hoe. But, the way Washington Township and Rancocas Valley are playing right now, I think Toms River North has an uphill battle to win another sectional title.
So that's a look at everything that's going on right now in the Shore Conference, where, again, the throne is there for anybody who wants to claim it. Now, taking a look down south in South Jersey, we're going to have a couple of quick hitters here in terms of what's going on down south, and we bring in Kevin Minnick to the podcast. And Kevin, after Winslow was certainly humbled by Bergen Catholic a couple of weeks ago, they got back on track with a big win against another non-public, this time the Hermits of St. Augustine.
Yeah, Dan, that game could have gone, one of two ways, I think. They could have either came out with a lethargic and, oh, woe is me after that last loss, or they step on the pedal a little bit and show what they're really made of. It took it took till the beginning of the second half before Winslow finally put it together. I mean, they held a 7-6 lead at halftime. They held St. Augustine to 2 field goals, which was if you saw the game, which was great. But there was like no energy. No, Winslow they were slow and they just didn't look like they were ready to play. And then, I asked a couple of kids after the game what Bill Belton said at halftime, and at times Bill can get a little energetic. Let's just put it that way. And I thought at halftime that his team did not match his energy in the first half. Well, they come out, they scored on their first 2 possessions of the second half. Took advantage of the fact that St. Augustine was without its top back, Roman Coney, who looked like he had an ankle injury in the first half. And they secured a 19-6 win, and okay, all is well. There's still way too much left in the Winslow tank right now. After 4 games last year, they were much better than they are now. And it's, I talked to, Belton after the game as well. And I'm like, what's going on with this group? I mean, there's no energy, coming out slow. And I know he's frustrated. Things don't get easier for them. They're the top public school team in the state. The bullseye is on their back every week. It's going to be on their back every week, especially coming off of last year's undefeated, championship season. And they know it. They have got to start to elevate their game in the first half. They have got to come out with more of a killer instinct to open games than they have shown. And they're going to take on Millville on Saturday, and Millville is not the same Millville team as last year. Clearly not even close to being the same. But they are a Millville team that has a lot of pride and a lot of winning tradition in the last, I don't want to say, dozen years. So, I'd love to see Winslow come out from the very start and play the way they did in the second half to start the game they have coming up on Saturday. Because, if they let Millville hang around, we all know what can happen when teams hang around. So we'll see what happens from there.
A team that's caught your eye just based on their extreme consistency has been Kingsway. Talk a bit about them here, Kevin.
Yeah, Dan, I think Kingsway gets overshadowed a little bit, as a Group 5 program. They've won 2 in a row since they lost to Camden. And they're a team that has been to at least the sectional semifinals 5 years in a row. They've been to a sectional final 3 of those 5 years and came away with 1 title. So Mark Hendricks does a great job getting those kids prepared. They know what it takes to get to those games deep in the season and to be competitive in those games. They've got a quarterback in David Orowitz, who I think might be one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the state. He's about 6'2" or so, but he is extremely efficient when he's throwing the football. He has hit on 75% of his passes. Now, he hasn't thrown the ball as much as a lot of other guys, but he's been extremely effective when he's needed to throw the football. And 75%, you can't argue with that. So, they play Camden Eastside, this week, which is not a gimme for them. Another opportunity to show what they're about. And, I think Kingsway, if you can have a sleeper in Group 5 and with their resume, still consider them a sleeper, I think, you got to really keep an eye on them.
And the aforementioned Camden Eastside that you just brought up, Kevin, they were a team that everyone kind of forgot about because of a lack of production and results in the last couple of seasons. They're now back in the fold.
Lack of production. That's a good one, Dan. They were 0-11.
I was trying to be nice.
0-11, Dan. And you know what? I've talked to their coaches. I've talked to Malik Brown, and I'm like, what the hell happened? How can that program, formerly Woodrow Wilson, that was winning sectional championships, regional bowl games, the tradition, they have a Heisman Trophy winner in Mike Rozier in their history. How can you go 0-11? How can you not score points? And, it's disappointing. And to them, this is the redemption tour. They are now 3-1. After last year's dismal 0-11 season, they're extremely young still. They've got a lot of freshmen and sophomores, especially on the line, who are really getting their first real taste of varsity football. And when you have youngsters on the lines, that presents a problem when they're not used to what's going on. So they are work in progress, but to come off of a winless season and be 3-1 right now, they're extremely happy to be 3-1 because they know what it was like to be 0-4 en route to 0-0. So they're another team. Like I said, they take on Kingsway this week. I would venture to say that Kingsway is clearly the favorite to win the game at home, but for Eastside, I'm going to bet that they're going to be competitive. They're not going to lay down. They got some talented kids. They've got some size. They have a defensive end in Elijah Stachel, who's going to NC State, who's extremely quick off the edge. They have a young quarterback in Naeem Dale, who threw the ball. It was crazy, 43 times on Saturday, and he only completed 13 of them. So we know how long that game took. Okay, it was forever and a day, but he threw for 250 some yards. So when he is making connections, they're for big chunks of yardage. They clean up a few things, they become even better, and in Group 2, I think they can be a team that can get into the playoffs. And then like they have even told me, Kev, anything can happen when you get in the playoffs. So we'll see what happens.
So thanks, Kevin. That's a look at everything that's going on in South Jersey. We now start to bring all of our writers back into the fold here as we're going to be talking about our NJ.com top 20 and having a bit of a roundtable. Kicking things off, Ryan, when we're looking at teams in the North, you're seeing the likes of Northern Highlands starting to make a big leap in the rankings. Paramus Catholic tumbling. Wayne Hills getting in because they're 4-0 off to a great start. Talk a bit about the movement of some of these teams in the Super Football Conference and the justification in your mind of why some teams are on the rise and why some teams are being punished for what you've said over the last couple of weeks. If you don't win games, it's going to eventually catch up to you.
Yeah, I want to start with Northern Highlands. They climbed 5 spots. Impressive win over Pascagoula Valley. I was there on Saturday in Hillsdale, and it was kind of what I expected. Pascagoula Valley has Adam Shaw out for the season. It just a brutal blow. You saw the season he was going to have at linebacker. He's a Michigan State commit. He's really good. They're going to miss him. And, Kai and Marley Smith are close. I think they're going to play this week, but they did rest last week. And the game wasn't really close. With Northern Highlands, I think it ultimately comes down to them being a lot more physical than they were last year. And I think I've said it before on the podcast. They last year against Pascagoula Valley, they lost Nate Johnson and Matt Boydell for the season, 10 plays apart. And you can't prepare for injuries, but I would say last year they were the ones taking hits, and this year now they're the ones delivering them. I also got to say Chase Calarco has taken it to another level both ways, which I didn't think was possible. And Jack O'Callahan, the senior quarterback's also been great. And I remember talking to Kevin before the season. I was like, this game against Holy Spirit, I don't know. I don't think Highlands is ready for this moment, but they were ready, and they've impressed me, from the first quarter of the season to now, like only more. They're just getting even more and more impressive. But Paramus Catholic, they tumbled to 15 after somewhat of a competitive game against St. Joe's on Friday, and they're 1-3, but it's a lot different of a 1-3 than Delbarton's 1-3. And the Green Wave, they tumble out of the rankings after being ranked 10th last week. And West Morris, they were 20. They get leapfrogged by St. Joe's Met and Wayne Hills. They're the new teams at 19 and 20 in our rankings. And St. Joe's has been impressive to start the season. A couple lopsided wins over good teams. And Wayne Hills is 4-0 for the first time in a few years. And they have some big games ahead in October. But, and I'll even admit, I wasn't so quick to get Wayne Hills in the rankings. I will say that win over West Essex is pretty impressive, an overtime win 2 weeks ago. And, I think that this Wayne Hills team is obviously, bigger and better than they've been in years past. They're capable of bigger things. But I guess my first question would be to Donovan. Donovan, what do you think of Delbarton and West Morris falling out of the rankings? Is it justified?
I don't want to call West Morris's result a total surprise, that one win, that 1 point win over Warren Hills. They hadn't been crushing teams coming in. They only had that 10-point win over Morris Knowles. I did think that they would win this game by at least 7 to 10 points. Warren Hills did come in playing a solid brand of football. To give credit to them. But we did talk about, and we've been talking about this all season, that this was one of their most important games, and they quite frankly did not really show that to us with that performance. The running game did show up, the O-line did show up. Those are two facets of their game that we know that they're going to be good at. But the defense has been hit or miss this season. They've got 2 wins where they've given up at least only like 6 or 7 points, and then they've got another 2 wins where they've surrendered 27 or more points, and this was one of those games. And truly, I do like this game did end on a turnover on downs committed by Warren Hills, but I do believe that if Michael Duffner had run for the first down on that 4th and 25, and it looked like he had room on that final play, that it would have been a 20-something or a 30-yard field goal, that Wes Morris might have lost this game.
And Joe, this is what you've been talking about in previous episodes of the Jersey Blitz, where you guys have a job to do of basing teams in the polls with their best and most difficult games and their matchups. And if they don't live up to the expectation, then they don't deserve that ranking. Is that a case in your minds with why Wes Morris was justified to be removed from the top 20?
Without question, at least in my opinion, Dan, is because, here's one of their bigger games, as Donovan alluded to, and you only win it by a point. And what we talked about and what we finally agreed upon was, if we leave Wes Morris in after that 1-point victory and look at the rest of their schedule, believing that they might win the remainder of the games, they're going to climb and climb and climb. And the entire while, we're going to be wondering to ourselves, are these guys really that good, and do they deserve to be this high? And that's why we made the decision to drop them out and bring in the 2 new teams. St. Joe Metuchen is playing, really well. And I know Ryan was a little hesitant to bring in Wayne. But again, what we looked at with Wayne in this situation was, in 2 weeks, they played their crosstown rivals. So if they win that game, they'll have earned their way in. And if they don't, they'll be back out too. And, I don't know how any of the other guys feel about Delbarton. Look, we all know that Delbarton would probably beat the majority of public school teams in the top 20. But again, my thinking is that if you play that schedule, you believe you can compete with that schedule. And when you don't, you're likely going to fall out of our rankings. And to be honest, Paramus Catholic, at least I think, is 1 loss away from coming out as well, Dan.
Donovan, your thoughts about Delbarton? Do you feel like this is a justified thing? Because there were high expectations for the Green Wave this year, but they've not lived up to those expectations in state and also out of state.
Yeah, talking with Ryan preseason, we did kind of see this coming with Delbarton. Let's get the good things out of the way about Delbarton first, right? They are one of the most well-coached teams in this state, number for the last several years, but it was always going to be a tough road for them this season with the amount of roster turnover that they were dealing with and having several new players in high-pressure roles for the first time in their high school careers. And we really did see that come to light in that 42-7 loss to Peters. And, we are talking about big games right now, and this was the first in-state game on Delbarton's schedule, and it's a big game against a top 10 opponent. And, they didn't perform that well. New sophomore quarterback Gavin Gallardi, just 96 passing yards, 2 interceptions. Kobe Irby Mason was fantastic at running back with 144 yards, but they couldn't find the end zone on the ground game, which is, it's really important in high school football. 1 and 2 against out-of-state teams, it was tough to keep them in.
And Kevin, when we're looking at different things with the top 20, you could make that same type of argument of, okay, if these teams were highly thought of to begin the season and they haven't lived up to the hype when it comes to some of the results in big games, what about a case of a team like a Glassboro that has been so highly thought of, but they don't challenge themselves, compared to a Winslow who was so highly thought of, and while they did get knocked around a little bit, they challenged themselves completely against 2 of the top teams in the nation. What do you feel about what Glassboro needs to do to maybe justify their entry into a top 10 and prove that they do have what it takes to be regarded as one of the top 10 teams in all of New Jersey high school football? It's kind of an interesting dynamic of, hey, you can't fault Winslow for trying their best against the best around, but if you're a dominant team like Glassboro and you don't have any chance to really impress, quote unquote, the committee, what do they have to do then to warrant that exposure in the top 10?
Yeah, Dan. I mean, that's the big that's a huge problem for Glassboro. Last year, 2 years ago is when they really started. You could look at them and you could say to yourself, okay, I see the talent. It's really young. They're only going to get better. But let's just face the fact. They don't play anybody for the majority of the time. And people can give me all the nonsense they want. The bottom line is they don't play anybody. And sometimes some wins mean more than others. Glassboro, they have to play a certain schedule in the WJFL. I get it. There are also crossover games that they have to play, but there has got to be a way. Winslow did it. Winslow played 2 games they got out of crossovers against. When Glassboro has that kind of talent, and it's coming up, and it's going to be there next year as well, you've got to find a way to get some better teams on your schedule. If you lose the game, so be it. You've challenged yourself, and you've given your kids really an opportunity to play a tougher schedule. No disrespect to the teams on their schedule. And I know those teams, they play their hardest. They're kids that live within those communities. They do what they can do. Okay. Glassboro kids, this particular team, last year's team, and next year's team are at a different level. They are not a quote unquote Group 1 football team. They have size. Tell me what Group 1 school has like a dozen to 20 kids, scholarship kids. And these kids are they still got another year left. Glassboro's biggest problem is the schedule. Okay. Everybody knows it. They just got to do something about it. They've got to play somebody better because, while we know how good Glassboro is as a collective unit of multiply talented kids, to go out and beat these teams that they're beating 50 and 60, putting 50 and 60 points on the board, and having these games essentially over at halftime does nobody any good. And, we're not going to sit here as a group and say, oh, well, Glassboro beat so-and-so 50-5. Well, 2 teams in front of them lost, so we got to move Glassboro up. No, because there's teams behind Glassboro that they may not be, I don't know, are they as talented as Glassboro? I don't know, but they are challenging themselves. They are playing better teams, more competitive teams, and they're winning these games. So the bottom line is, yeah, we know Glassboro is good. And you know what? By the end of the season, maybe maybe the next meaningful game for Glassboro will be the one that puts them into the top 10, makes them a, 7, 8, 9, 10 team. But we're not going to see that game, Dan, until late November or early December. And that's the kind of the sad part about it, is that we have to wait that long for Glassboro to play somebody, and that's the bottom line. Got to play somebody. Joe, what do you think? Because I think Glassboro needs to play somebody. If we're gonna take a Glassboro week in and week out and look at them and elevate them higher in the rankings, they got to play somebody, and I don't think it's happening.
Well, I got a question for you. In the Shore Conference, they took Shore Regional and moved them into a division with all 3s and 4s. They took Point Pleasant Borough, a 2, put them in Class A South with Tonsberg North and Brick Memorial and Jackson and all bigger schools. So first question I have is, why isn't the WJFL taking this upon themselves to place them in a higher ranking division? And then two, in the old days, a lot of teams wouldn't play a group 1 or 2 because it killed them in the PowerPoints. Now, I don't know. Does a group 3 or a 4 playing Glassboro hurt it in the PowerPoints if they lose to Glassboro, Kev?
Probably. I would say it probably does hurt them, but I would think, you're not going to improve your program or show the quality of your program if you don't take on some teams that are tough. And that's the thing. I completely agree with you. I don't think anybody in a 2, 3, or 4 wants to play Glassboro because they're afraid of losing and what that might ultimately do. But you know what? You challenge Glassboro, win or lose. I don't know if it's gonna kick you out of the playoffs. And maybe if the loss did kick you out of playoffs, maybe you didn't belong anyway. And the West Jersey Football League, I'll tell you this, and the league's been around far too long now for it to kind of stay with this philosophy. When it started, the philosophy was they wanted to group teams of similar group size together. They wanted to eliminate a lot of travel. They wanted to, I don't know, maybe in a way they wanted to make it easy. I don't know. But that was the big thing. We want to play teams of similar size. And that's what they've kind of stuck with for the most part. You look at all the divisions in the West Jersey Football League, there's 16 of them. Pretty much every team in each division is one size above or one size below. There are a couple divisions where there's a 2-size difference. All right. Glassboro, it's a 2-year cycle. So last year and this year are the same. They would have had to do this 2 years ago. But when that cycle begins next season, Glassboro needs to be in a totally different group playing, in my opinion, 3s and 4s. They did it with St. Joe Hamilton many years ago when Paul Sacco had that team rolling. They played anybody. They need to do the same thing with Glassboro this year.
And I think, Kevin, is that, again, not that the Shore Conference is, the greatest athletic conference in the world, but they realign every year in attempt to keep their divisions competitive. I just think the WJFL is comfortable and set in its ways, and they really need to kind of reflect and at least challenge Glassboro with some crossover games against some good football teams.
You're absolutely right. And I know a lot of these guys, and I don't want to say that they're scared about doing something like that. I don't know if it's against their charter. I have no idea, why they settle with the 2-year cycle. But it's, you look at, if you want to be, there's only 5 leagues in the state. So I want to say if you want to be the premier league, you got to do this or that. But if you've got teams that, are just blowing other teams out, nobody's getting any better. The only thing they're doing in a lot of times is, stats are looking really good. Stats look really great. We're scoring 50 a game. We might break the South Jersey scoring record. Who cares? Play somebody. And you know what? That's just the bottom line. And a lot of schools will say, well, we can only play the schedule that we have. I get it. But you know what? Winslow went out and got 2 games. So you know what? If you have that kind of talent that they clearly do this year and clearly did last year and will again next year, you know what? I'm taking off those crossover games and I'm finding somebody who's willing to do it, because I know there are guys out there that would play Glassboro at a drop of a dime, because they know not only will they benefit from it, but everybody's going to benefit from it in the long run.
I love this conversation, guys. This is the passion that we want in our top 20. And it's really conversations that need to be had, because when you're looking at competition, it goes both ways. You might have some teams that want to play, and other teams, quite frankly, they've gotten too fat and lazy when it comes to their scheduling, because they know if I play this team, it might cost me 1 or 2 home games in the playoffs. And if you're really good, I think you don't worry about where that game's going to be potentially played, especially when it's now how you decide the different playoff groups. It's a fascinating conversation to have going forward because if you are Glassboro and you take that step up in competition and maybe you swing and a miss, do you still feel though that, okay, we now face a team that had as much, if not more, team speed than we have, and that's going to get us ready, as you said, Kevin, for a playoff game. It may have to be on the road, but you kind of see in all these different brackets, it benefits you if you play tougher competition, no matter when they're and where the playoff game is going to be housed later on in the season. You feel like you've challenged yourself. So it's a great discussion that we just had here in the top 20 and breaking down some of the big storylines of a justification of why some teams are out, why some teams are in, and why some teams are still having to do a little bit more to improve upon that resume. That's going to bring us now to some of the week 4 games that we're going to be really looking forward to, and bringing back Ryan here on the Jersey Blitz, looking at that opportunity that St. Peter's Prep has once again to take another step forward and getting back to that upper echelon where they resided for so many years. It's right there for the taking against St. Joe's this week for the Marauders.
Yeah, this game is going to be just outstanding, Dan, as I teased earlier in the episode. You know, St. Joe's won in the regular season last year, and it was lopsided, but the gap was a bit narrowed in the postseason. Much closer game. You know, the game in the postseason last year, it didn't include Lamar Best, who was nursing that broken collarbone from last year, and unfortunately, he's not healthy right now. You know, we'll see if he plays, but you know, last year you could just see how much better St. Peter's got, you know, as the year went on, and now they're just a flat out good team. They have the ground game, like I mentioned, Teray and Barksdale. Offensive line anchored by Olu Babola, you know, the blue chip junior there. Tyler Bell, he's Tyler Bell, you know, great dual threat quarterback who can spread the ball around the offense. And then the defense has been just night and day better. You know, they bottled up Union City's wing T. You know, they pitched a shutout against Shabazz, and then they held Delbarton to 7 points. And, you know, obviously St. Joe's is a much different opponent, and they just beat a Paramus Catholic team that at times moved the ball on St. Peter's in week 0. But, you know, this St. Peter's defense is competing at a high level, and you know, if they keep this up, I think they could contend in non-public A. But for now, I think they are still a tier behind. But this is the first real test for them, and it's, you know, I don't know if this is a bit of an exaggeration, but I think this is a must-win game for them. You know, to get people to believe in them, you know, believe they can contend in non-public A. And ultimately, I just think it means a little more to them than it does Joe's. But, you know, for Joe's, you know, obviously they don't want to leave Caven Point with a loss, but and that's because it'll impact non-public A seating. But you know, you look at the key for them. It's just the athletes that they have getting in space, and you know, the ability that they could have to, you know, just exploit St. Peter's defense. Even if Nate Bailey isn't 100% right now, this is an offense that has a lot of talent. And Gary Nova, great offensive mind there, and you know, he's just looking at the tape and chomping at the bit to, you know, find a way to get this St. Peter's offense and defense and kind of just bring them, you know, back down to earth a bit. And ultimately, you know, the talent is on the defensive side of the ball for St. Joe's. And you know, I mentioned bringing down St. Peter's offense, you know, back down to earth. That's going to be their goal. Gary's coaching the offense, so he's going after that defense. But that defense for St. Joe's is just going to try to bottle up all the talent that they have, you know, over in Jersey City right now. And just can't wait to see how this plays out.
And Kevin, for you, one of the games that you're looking forward to watching is a battle of the unbeatens down in South Jersey.
Yeah, Dan, unfortunately, although I would love to see it, I'm not going to be able to chance to go because Bill Evans is going to cover the game. But, you know, we can't double up. We got to do some other things. But the game is in Burlington County. It's Burlington Township, number 18 in our rankings this week, against Delran. Both teams come in at 4-0. Both teams, you know, I think come in with something to prove, that they can, you know, they're not so much of a product of their schedule, that they are as good as the 4-0 says they are. So, you know, we got a Burlington Township team on the road, scoring a lot of points. They have scoring a lot of points. Aiden Binns, junior running back, he went for 300 and some odd yards last week. He's kind of been the focal point offensively for them. They do have a freshman in Gerald Saki, real talented freshman wide receiver who's piling up the yards and the touchdowns right now as well. So two guys to look at for them. And then you look on the flip side with Delran. If you know anything about Delran and Delran football and the Saka name, you know that your odds are the kid's probably pretty good. And Vinny Saka is pretty good. Real nice dual threat quarterback for the Bears. He's done a real nice job of throwing the ball. Justin Mary, one of their top receivers right now, is doing a real nice job. He's kind of making a little bit more of a name for himself after transferring from Holy Cross a couple years back. And, it's just a game there, where everybody kind of knows each other. Bragging rights are on the line. Division line, where you're going to fit in the division race is on the line. It's just one of those games that, is going to be exciting on both sides. I can't see this game potentially being lopsided one way or another. I can see it being a game that comes down to the wire, and maybe a situation where whoever has the ball last wins.
So that's going to be an exciting one to read about after it's played this weekend. And certainly, Ryan, this is the moment that a lot of people have been waiting for. This is the game that a lot of sports fans will circle on their calendar as soon as it comes out. Bergen versus Bosco, 1 versus 2. The scene will be at Granite Hill Stadium in Ramsey this year under the lights on a Friday night. Let's get right to it in terms of breaking down this game. The big playability needs that have to be there for BC if their running game is not getting going. Now, be careful, because we found out if you call into question Bergen Catholic's lack of an ability to run the football, Vito Campanelli and the guys, they take that with them into their next game like they showed against Winslow. If Bergen can't run the football, how can they move the ball against this stiff Don Bosco prep defense?
Well, I never said they couldn't run the football. I just said they haven't ran it well, and I had a feeling that they were going to try to exploit that against Winslow, which they did. But everyone knows that's their game plan every week. They want to play smash mouth football every game, no matter the opponent. They want to run the ball, play physical at the line of scrimmage, violent tackling. You name it. That's their brand of football. And against a team like Don Bosco, that game plan doesn't work, all the time. It doesn't work 100% against a team that has that kind of size up front. O'Neal, Ekins, Makai Allen, and Acapinti at linebacker, Hinspitters, a new kid in that front seven dominating. So that's a tough team to move the ball against, North and South. And Coach Cam said it best. Bergen Bosco, nothing goes as planned. It doesn't go how you think it's going to. And if you think you're going to run the ball down your throat, it doesn't always work that way. Bergen definitely can, but it might not work. And this Bergen program, and Coach Vito does such a good job at it, is he knows the exact time to pull the plug. He knows the exact time to throw the script out the window and do something else to try to win the game. And he's just got a tremendous feel for the game. And if Bergen is struggling to go north and south, I think they're going to try to air it out like they did in the regular season game. 5 plays, you blink, and all of a sudden Bergen's got the lead again, and Bosco's playing from behind. And I called it last year in that state final. I said, watch out for Brian Porter on jet sweeps, and he took 2 for touchdowns in that game, because I had a feeling that they were going to try to do things differently and get creative, because that's the type of coaching staff they have. That's the type of personnel they have. You look at Busso, Porter again this year, and Willis, the receiver there. It's big plays, and momentum swings are what win you games like this. It's those 3 guys that could completely change things, and they're averaging, those 3, 20.4 yards per catch, and Tagliaferri's averaging 16.4 yards per completion, and he's played mistake-free football to start the season. So Bosco's defense is incredibly athletic, incredibly physical, but those guys are going to be tested. And it's scary to know that if Bergen, is not going north-south, they still have 95% of their playbook to dive into and, dice up defenses.
And it's scary also to think about with all those names that you mentioned there with skilled players, quarterback, the 3 wide receivers for BC, not a single senior in that whole mix, Ryan. So if you're Don Bosco prep and you're now really feeling like you might have one of your best defenses under Coach Sabella in the last couple of years, how do you rattle that sophomore quarterback? How do you get those wide receivers off their game? Because the stability, the senior experience lies in the running back core for Bergen Catholic with Calhoun and Kane. How do you make them, if you're Don Bosco, have them beat you through the air with younger kids?
Well, they did it last year, and you mentioned the younger kids. Bosco has, juniors, like O'Neal's a junior. Allen's a junior. You go to the secondary, Phoenix Evans, he's one of the best sophomores in the entire country. So, this Bosco team, and I was talking to Coach Vito about it earlier today, and he's just so impressed with what Bosco has at the skill positions. Alvarez Jr., Zakai Murphy Jr. So there's all these kids who, right off the bat here, not too far into their high school careers, they've been sensational for Don Bosco. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. I think that Bosco has the guys to make it a good game. I would pick Bergen, but I think Bosco's got the guys, and I just kind of can't wait to dive into what else here.
And when we're talking about sophomore quarterback at Bergen Catholic, well, there's a sophomore quarterback at Don Bosco Prep in Carson Shane, who's now going to be experiencing this really for the first time at the varsity level. What are you looking at for him? And what do you think that Coach Tony DeBellis, the defensive coordinator at BC, has up his sleeves waiting to try to get him off his game?
Yeah, this is kind of what I was hoping we would talk about because, as fascinating as Tagliaferri's been for Bergen, I think you have to look at what Carson Shane's done at Bosco. And I talked with Vito about this too. If you're a sophomore playing in this league in the SFC United Red and White, you're starting at quarterback, you're doing something right. And we all saw that comeback in Texas. But Bergen's going to try to throw the kitchen sink, at him here, like you mentioned, different blitz packages, different coverages. So it's going to be interesting to see what Bergen does. And I think the big element, Dan, is, the turnovers. That's kind of been the story the last 4 times these two have met. And, Bosco they've been reckless. They haven't taken care of the ball. 10 takeaways for Bergen in these last 4 meetings, 9 in the last 3 meetings, and 5 in the regular season game last year. One was a bad punt snap that went for a touchdown, and the other was an interception in the waning minutes, on that trick play from Rennick Dorillis where he just threw the ball downfield. And I believe it was Naeem Parrish who intercepted it. So, the only blunders Bergen's really made in these last couple games here, the Lamont Lester block punt from a couple years ago. And then I think it was Makai Allen who recovered the onside kick in the regular season game last year when Bosco was trying to make the comeback. But Bergen's, just taking advantage in the turnover department, and it's turned it into points. So, Bergen's just got to try to find a way here to create havoc, alter Shane a bit and just try to confuse him. Because that's what makes a difference in these games. It's the momentum swings, the big offensive plays, the big turnovers on defense. That's what wins these kind of rivalry games.
And the last question I have for you about this preview of Bergen versus Bosco, because of the nature of this rivalry, the atmosphere that's going to be around the stadium on Friday night, in your mind, does that negate what has been clearly a difference when it comes to strength of schedule for these two teams? As great as that come from behind victory was for Don Bosco Prep in Texas, that was not against one of the top 10 teams in Texas. Bergen Catholic opens up against East St. Louis, who was a top 25 team in the nation, took on West Boca in Florida, was the defending state champ, and then took on the likes of Winslow as well. They're definitely more battle hardened, and then Bosco coming in off a bye. Does that normally mean something? But when you come to this rivalry, you throw it out the window because lights, camera, action, you never know what's going to happen in Bergen Bosco.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned the bye, Dan, and I never even thought of that because, yeah, you're right. I mean, Bergen has played a tougher schedule. There is no doubt there. They've played the tougher schedule. But I just wish I was at a Bosco practice this week. I mean, they must have been practicing so hard over the last 2 weeks, hitting hard, just trying to get that intensity up because you figure Bosco's defense against Bosco's offense against Bosco's defense, first teamers going at it. That's like high level football. And that's what's going to get you ready for Bergen Catholic on both sides of the ball. So that element's interesting. It is. And I think that Bergen, Bosco's they're rested, they're pretty healthy going into this game, but Bergen's schedule, the schedule they've played against, that's going to get, I think that Bergen's just a little more ready for this game, but that week off for Bosco, it could make the difference. I mean, you look at both sides of the ball for Bosco, those guys are really good, and just an extra week of preparation for a team like Bergen, it's fascinating. You're going to see what matters more, rest or just, a battle-tested team.
It's going to be fascinating to see which one it could be. Again, just the first of 2 potential meetings between these 2 arch rivals in this 2025 season. Reminder, fans, that from the opening kickoff to the end of the season, NJ.com's award-winning staff of reporters and photojournalists put you in the middle of the action for in-depth coverage of all these games that we were talking about and games around New Jersey throughout the course of 2025, including photo galleries, recaps, and stats, be sure to visit NJ.com/HSSports. And I will be on the call for 2 great games this weekend for our NJ.com subscribers. On Friday, it is a great matchup in the NJIC. Glen Rock taking on Rutherford. It was a 31-30 slugfest last year. Looking forward to seeing who's going to come out on top and probably punch their ticket as a divisional champion and play in the NJIC Final Four in that one. That game is going to be on Friday at Rutherford, 6 p.m. kickoff. And then on Saturday, get a look at Mount Olive taking on Morristown at 1 p.m. in Morris County. So that's all coming up this weekend here on NJ.com. And you can watch all those games live and on demand on NJ.com/watch. So I'd like to thank my compatriots here for a great show here on the Jersey Blitz. Ryan, Patti, Donovan Hugel, Joe Zedalis, and Kevin Minnick. We'd like to thank David Liss, who's our producer, and reminding you fans, join us next week as we'll break down all the action of New Jersey high school football here on the Jersey Blitz. Take care, everybody.